records everything.
Yeah.
So we end up using anyway, I have to upgrade my
Yours too.
computer to withstand
I
all
know.
the data now.
I know it's so
I
much.
never thought I would be in that position. I mean, I never imagined, ever doing this, like having a podcast and being a part of this group. I mean, just so many things.
I know it's a lot.
So
It's a lot.
an interesting change. And I'm buying equipment now.
Yeah. Everything's up.
Quality,
Yeah, I'm such a technophobe, so everything, it's very hard to be on top of that.
I am too, but you know what? It pushes me to learn something new. I mean, I hung on to tapes until you could not have a tape player. They didn't build a car with a tape player in it anymore. That's when I let go of tape.
And you were still
yes.
Like, give me my cassettes. Do you still have a box of them somewhere?
I don't. They got lost. I've moved so many times, and even my CDs did. So it took a while to give that up. But it's they've been gone a long time. But it took a while to give up and to those things and to step into the new. I wasn't a big texter in the beginning, and now I prefer it. So it's sort of a, just.
You're like a late adopter of technology.
Yes, but
I am too.
But give me I learned how to open a wine bottle on the beach using a key.
You did?
A pen.
Wow.
Yes. Now I love to fix those kinds of problems, practical, like everyday, my mom taught me how to sew where you don't have any of the seam showing. If you want to have a look where there's a button and you have a gap, for example, and you can take that gap. So I've learned all of those. She used to teach things like that. So I like problem solving these really material things. Anyway, we don't have to keep talking about this. This is just what. So
no, that's cool. Yeah. I mean, I once picked a lock with a paper clip.
There you go.
It did take me a couple of hours, but I got in.
But but there's something that's so gratifying about that. And you know what, if we're going to put the kind of psychological spin on it, I think that was one of the things I struggled with a bit as a therapist, at least in my early years in the practice, was that for somebody that really likes to see results in black and white, in therapy, you don't see that at all. I think that contributed to a lot of early career anxiety that I had.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I just kind of made that connection right now, but.
Well, that's a perfect segue. So we were going to, the article that Lisa Selin Davis wrote was published in the Free Press.
Yes.
And that was interesting. It was a really good article. She did such a good job putting that together. And it was about how social justice is taking over counseling. Therapy. And she talked with both of us for that article.
Yes.
So it's very pertinent. And, you mentioned that you had, as a therapist, there were some things that you had to kind of learn to get in a flow with, and things that were difficult for you, but this has changed everything. There's always been those classical issues with the rapport or how well the modality is working or whatever it might be.
Yes.
But now this introduces a whole another element.
Yes, it does. It's funny you say that, because when this started, when critical social justice started to become incorporated a lot more into the curriculum, I actually kind of sat there with myself and said, I have to learn a whole new language and an entire new theory.
Wow. Wait, so do you remember a starting point of that? When did that, was it sudden and you'd been teaching this way and then it was boom, here, we're going to introduce this? Was there something like that?
I mean, I think there was, and I've talked about this, I think, before, and it's funny, the more I talk about it, I think the more I remember, and the more I come up with sort of a better way to frame a framework for myself to understand what happened, because I do think that it was already there. The sprinklings of it were there. And I don't think it was as in your face or as prominent or whatever, but there was a particular moment. I think I've shared the story before about my student who had written, I was teaching a group therapy class, and he wrote in his paper that he thought I hated men.
I remember that.
Yes. Okay. So he's the one who I went to my supervisor, who happened to be his academic advisor. And she was, the head of the trauma department at the time. And I was working in the trauma department as a professor. So I said to her, your student I mean, what do you think about this? We used to you'd share work sometimes with the advisor if there's something that came up that was concerning. That was actually a good policy. So she said, oh, he's woke now. So the minute she said that, I could put together what woke meant, in my opinion. I could figure it out. He was, Black male. I could figure out, and, was very successful in a particular industry. I don't want to give too many details, but there was an industry he was in before he changed, extremely successful. And then now, is going through this whole self-awareness kind of epiphany and awakening. And so then, woke awakening, but that's when I said, okay, I figured out that, but I literally that very same day, I go in and I start reading papers that I was going to grade, and I see the word cisgender. And
Oh
then
my
I went,
gosh, same
oh
day?
my God, yes.
And
At the very same day.
did
And
you
I
have to have
went,
that word explained to you, or did you just, because it feels like there was a lot of creep with this stuff to
it
me.
was
Like, I don't remember
so
when I
much
noticed it,
creep.
but it was just there.
Yes. Well, I sat there and went, I think and my office was next door to somebody that worked in like the LGBTQ, etc. specialization. And I remember talking to him that day, and we were talking about maybe me teaching a class in their department. And I said, I don't think I can. There's just a lot of stuff I don't have a good grasp on. And I remember feeling like he was looking at me, and there was a judgment that kind of came over me where, gee, you need to be studying this stuff. You need to understand what these movements are. You need to know what these words mean and these concepts.
And did you feel that from him, or was that more of an internal thing?
No, I felt it from him without him directly stating it. And I just went, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I have to learn this. To me feels like a whole new language that I don't know. And I have to figure out how to learn it. I was able to figure out what cisgender meant because of the context of the paper and the way that it was written. So I put together what that was, but I had never seen the word ever before. And I didn't use it in my case studies or case examples that I would share with the class either. And they would get very upset. I mean, see, these things all start coming back to you. I mean, you've talked about it so many times, and they have a little, well, you need to put in the gender, I can't remember what it was even. And then, so I just said, well, I'm not going to do that. So you're just going to have to accept it. I mean, but I knew that I needed to learn these things, and I wasn't up for it. I just wasn't up for it. It was a language. It was something different. And that was not of interest to me. It wasn't.
Well,
to me, it was just another complicated, convoluted theory to add on top of all of this.
Of so much else. Is something that about you noticing like there's a fixed point where you became aware of this? That's really interesting. I guess I can think of times when that happened to me as well.
Yeah.
But there's this way that this stuff is presented that it's like, I don't know. I've had conversations about this before. I think I talked with Val Thomas about this, about how rather unlike other concepts that come into the, I guess, the academic sphere or any kind of educational paradigm, unlike these concepts that get robustly discussed and debated and introduced, and there's like seminal papers and such, this stuff was almost slid in like you're already supposed to know it. Like we're not even going to.
It was.
It's like we're not going to go through a phase of introducing you to this because you should have known it yesterday, even though we're telling it to you for the first time right now.
Yes. That was the impression I got, is that I should have already known, even though I had just literally heard these words. The same day, even. I was only on campus a couple of days a week. So that's, I guess why also happened in the same day, because I was there to grade papers and I had a class at night, and I, used my time I got there early to talk to my boss about her student that was in my class, or student that was in my class. Anyhow, but no, there was a feeling that you needed to have known. but there's nowhere to go to find it. There's
No.
not like there was a resource guide that was given
Right.
to us or something.
Yeah.
One day it just emerged, I felt like,
It's
and I
just
went,
there.
yes.
CNY photo video. Hi, I see you in the chat there. Thanks for joining us. So he says, we just talked about this in Monday in Jennifer's group, the whole origins of the term cisgender. It seems to have appeared out of nowhere.
Yes.
And that was the way it felt. That's
exactly how it felt. And I went, what is this? I don't know what this is. And then I have this person over here that's telling me, that I need to have an awareness, or, I mean, it was sort of like, how could you not know it? Sort of a judgmental look.
Yeah.
Like, how could you not have already been incorporated? Like, I think he said something about how he has been incorporating this for a long time into his classes or something. And I said something like, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I kind of acted as though I knew more than I did. He kind of knew I didn't know what I was talking about or what he was talking about, and I didn't. I could put it together, but then I thought, well, if there's a cisgender mean, so what does it mean when you feel not, the same connected to your gender and your sexual orientation? Like, it's just too complicated. It's so complicated for something that to me isn't. I mean, it isn't. I mean,
yeah. Well, it's what you have to do if you're going to normalize everything. If
that's
you're going to say
problem.
Yeah.
Bingo.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. It's that when you normalize everything, then you have to learn everything on the inside and out. And somebody had made a really good, comparison to, that's like saying to every restaurant that they have to all have at least one vegan option and one, gluten-free option, because you have to appeal, to everybody. And if somebody's allergic to gluten and you don't have a gluten-free option, then it's not like, oh, just pick a new restaurant. That's what we do. We just pick a new restaurant.
Right.
It's, that it would be like telling them they're forced to accommodate that.
Right.
That's the normalization component, where then you're right. We're sitting there needing to learn 50 new terms every, couple of months, because some researcher in the University of Washington, who, by the way, came up with the ZIR and the ZIR one, and the she, the XI, she pronouncing. That was at the that was during the 2020, 2021 was
really?
pandemic
gosh.
stuff. That's okay. And I 98 of them appeared or something like that. It was in the 80s or 90s. Okay. So then I told my friends, we're going to have to learn all this. Oh my God, Christine, you're overreacting. Well, what happened? Right. Those started to show up. And then here we are. So then now when the University of fill in the blank puts out another research study that comes up with 25 other pronouns or concepts, and you have to go and follow these people, and you need to learn it all, because that is the way that you are going to teach a very well-rounded class. I mean, that's just absolutely nonsense, and it's utter nonsense, and just word salad. My favorite. Yeah. Word salad. Just a bunch of things in there that just, it's one big mess.
It is. It's like the Stanford, the harmful language guide.
Yes.
Which is it's kind of like the other side of the coin, is like the removal from language of things that could be even remotely like linked to something that someone somewhere could be offended by.
Yes. So it's I mean, where does that end? I mean, where does that end? I've seen it I've seen it played out in people that I know in my personal life too. It's like this lack of tolerance for a different or for discomfort or distress or something. It's like they've hijacked the word safe, so I can't, that word safe makes me just choke. I can't even
it makes my skin crawl to hear it sometimes.
Yes,
because there's a few words like that that are so cloaked with double meaning.
Yeah, they are, because the whole point of psychological safety was so that you would be able to say what you really truly think and feel without, being judged. I mean, it was supposed to be still being treated with compassion. Now, it's used as a tactic to keep people weak and to keep people angry and to keep people distracted and disoriented and hostile. I don't know. Yeah,
Lisa's article, she used a couple of little vignettes, little anecdotes of people who'd been through a therapy experience with a social justice therapist.
Yes.
And how harmful that was.
Yes.
Not just to that therapeutic relationship, but also it gave the client something that they really needed to they needed to work to process a
Yes.
new experience that had been really harmful because it happened within the context of a trusted relationship. And that's a
Yes.
huge violation of the, you know, the, I think the ethical code, or
Yes.
what at least it used to be before they rewrote it to make it
Yes.
be able to encompass this stuff. But one of the things that when I think about what's happening in therapy, and I noticed, Google told me today that it's mental health awareness month or something like that, or week or day or something. And I've seen that in a couple of places now. I got a letter from the library saying something about mental health awareness. And I think about how, how much, well, COVID and the lockdowns really hurt people, and it really hurt kids, really
Big
hurt
time.
kids. Yeah. I mean, you took these kids who were used to having this vibrant social experience, going out and seeing their friends every day. And now they're shut in their house, and they're scared to death to see anybody. And they're
Yes.
sitting on a computer, which is, I think that there's few things you could do that are worse for kids than to plug them into a computer for 8 hours a
Yes.
day.
Yes.
And then you let them back out, and you go, oh, here, have life again. You can go back to life. And they're so messed up. I mean, they're just
Yes.
really struggling from these experiences. And so what do? We increase the funding for mental health services,
Yes.
and we make sure that there's more counselors per capita in every school, and mental health. But who are you staffing these positions with? You're staffing these positions with the same kind of people that are being trained in programs like we both
Yes.
have been talking about, and like Lisa's talking about in this article.
Yes.
And, I think that there's long been many reasons to hesitate to take a child to a therapist.
Yes.
I'm very, and I don't mean this in a political sense, I'm just very conservative about
Yes.
children in therapy and what I think is appropriate there. But even more so now, I mean, this is, you're exposing them directly to someone who's been trained to indoctrinate. So
Trained to indoctrinate and handpicked. I mean, let's not forget, we're handpicking the people that go into the programs. We are creating this new
activists.
form, yes, of activist therapy. It's and I agree as well. I mean, I was never a fan of throwing kids into therapy too quickly anyhow. And my work, I did a lot of grief work in the beginning of my career. One of the things that would happen is that there'd be a death in the family, right? So parent would die. The other parent would call and say, oh, I want my child in a grief support group right now. And that was, excuse me. We never wanted them to just be in therapy because somebody died. And their reactions
very
to it.
Difficult to also then have to get in. You're a little kid, you've just lost your parent, and now here's this stranger that you're supposed to learn to get to know, and that introduces so many new variables. That's interesting.
Yes, it does. And it's really the parents or the surviving adult, is very has their own grief reaction, and they themselves are just overwhelmed by their feelings. And so we would tell them to be very, we were very wary of putting them in therapy too soon. Like, it was almost like telling them that any kind of reaction they were going to have was pathologized, in a sense that something was wrong or bad about it, or that they needed extra help, more help than the average kid who had the same thing happen. So we were very mindful of that. We always suggested doing groups, like support groups, because the groups were just groups of peers, and they weren't run by therapists, and they would have all sorts of different things, related to life after, things, how things have changed after. So there's a lot more.
That seems like a really good alternative.
That's very, the group model. And it's not even group therapy, with support group model. So sort of like kids helping kids,
like
peer
support.
And then you had like an adult who was obviously trained,
just facilitating. Yeah.
We had teen group leaders that would be with the adult, and there are people that had gone through the program too, and so they were there to talk to the kids about what it was like for them, when the father-daughter dance came around, and there is no father, or what. I don't know that they have that stuff as traditionally now, but they did back even as far as maybe 10 years, 12 years ago, those things were still
Well,
going
now
on.
it would be like a parent-child dance.
It would be and not
Yeah.
even parent. Now it's adult
Oh
caregiver,
gosh.
child. You can't even say parent. So, I mean, it's anyhow, but
Yeah.
at that time, they would help them cope with the fact that, like, okay, you can't go with your dad, like who else can you bring, and then talk about your feelings around that, but it wasn't about let's change the language to
Mhm.
suit the 10% or so, 20 to 25% of kids that will experience that. It was, let's change that all, the death of a parent. It's like, I think it's, what was the statistic? It's either 1 in 10 or 2 in 10 in LA County will experience the death of a parent before the age of 25.
Oh,
Okay.
wow. That's quite a lot.
It is a lot,
That's a lot.
but
But still, it's like,
to change,
10 to
yes,
20%. And so there's another 80 to 90% that
there's
won't.
still 80
Yeah.
to 90% that won't. Now, again, we were using the word parent and we can't say that anymore. That percentage is even smaller of people who've experienced the death of an adult who was caring for them that was not their parent. Now you're going to take that number and cut it down to probably 10% of that number. That's going to give you the 2 kids per 100. Okay. That experienced the death of someone, who've had a parent die that wasn't their actual parent, but it was the adult caregiver. And then with the adult caregiver, because their parent, biological parent, isn't able to care for them.
Like a grandmother
now we're
or
looking
something.
at, right.
Mm-hmm.
So grandmother or an aunt or a foster parent or something like that. So now you're looking at a percentage that's even smaller.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
So now we've removed, and I'm just talking about grief here. Now we've removed all of that, all of those words to accommodate whatever percentage of kids that are in any scenario with a caregiver that are not their biological parent, in order to protect whatever the percentage is, that's that smaller percent. And that's not, something came up today. We were talking to somebody that's going to be on our podcast soon. And, he brought up this great point about the dominant view is not necessarily an oppressive view. So you may have a dominant, so the dominant narrative or the dominant fact, okay, is that 80, 90% of these kids won't go through something like this. Does that mean that it oppresses does that oppress the 10 or 20% who do? No. The dominant fact or the dominant story that most people won't go through that does not oppress the people who do go through it. It doesn't.
That's rational to say that. That's rational, but that's in opposition to queer theory, which would say that just by virtue of being dominant, it must be subverted.
Correct.
Okay.
Which is exactly what we were discussing when that came up, was queer theory. And I wanted a very clear understanding of that. So that's the whole idea, though, is that because of that, you would have to deconstruct, dismantle all of those things.
Right.
Those institutions. Now the institution of therapy itself as a structure has to be dismantled in order to, accommodate for or fill in for this whatever percentage. So it was a very interesting comment, but it helped a lot to just think about it that way, that the dominant view or dominant fact does not oppress necessarily the minority.
Yeah. And when you're talking
it just
about,
means there are more people that have,
it's just a statistical sort of like an observational thing sometimes.
Right. Correct.
So when you're talking about, even back when you were teaching grief therapy, and you had some reasons to hesitate, you had some cautions or caveats to children being brought into therapy, I think that there are a lot of reasons to hesitate, even wokeness aside, even without that. And when my older daughter was a kid, she was maybe 11 or 12, I can remember this mom, another one of her friends' mothers, talking about her daughter's diagnoses just right in front of the kid, and it struck me as so weird. It was kind of the first time I'd been exposed to something like that. But I felt like covering the little girl's ears is how I felt, because the way this mom was talking about it, she's like, oh, she has ADHD, and she's listing medical and also mental health kind of diagnoses. And it felt like she was saying, so she's special.
Yes.
But it was in a positive way. And there's a lot to dissect there, because it's not that those things should be seen as character deficits or anything that makes her not as good as somebody else. I don't think that. But they are limitations that are to be
Yes.
worked with and to help the kid
Yes.
overcome or work well in spite of, at
Yes.
least. And the way that this was being done, it was being done like these were badges of celebratory victimhood.
Yes.
And I had not really heard that done with diagnoses before.
Yes.
And I think that there's been this push for a long time to destigmatize diagnosis, which is, I don't know. I mean, there's a conversation to be had about how valuable that is and whether we've gone too far with it. And I kind of think that maybe we have. But one of the things that really struck me is that when a kid is, a young adolescent, they're in this phase of identity formation and exploration.
Yes.
And if you start giving them labels like that,
Yes.
then they're going to attach really closely to those. And you risk creating somebody whose identity is based on some of these things.
Yes.
They are badges of identity for this person.
Yes.
And so that always struck me as one of the reasons to avoid a medicalized diagnosis-based mental health model
Yes.
for kids,
Yes.
among other reasons.
Well, kids are not fully developed anyway. Their
Mhm.
brains are not fully developed until they're 25 or so.
Mhm.
That's when the brain stops growing. I mean, this is probably accepted research for the past decade at least, maybe. And
Yeah, your
so
prefrontal
it's
cortex is not complete.
yes. So this is why I have a huge problem. And this comes on the heels again of this earlier conversation I had today. But this is why I have a huge issue with diagnosing gender dysphoria in children. I mean, you cannot diagnosing in children in general, I think is extremely difficult. I think it's very nuanced, and I think it's a lot less common than what we're seeing. It's overdiagnosed, in my opinion. And I think that's because we're not giving kids a chance to grow out of phases. We're
Yeah.
looking at these models of child and adolescent development with, kind of this lens that's
Oh,
both too
yeah.
broad and too specific. It's both.
Right.
And so then we're hitting these marker points. So a lot of the time, the kids are just a symptom of what's happening in the family, with what's wrong with
Yes.
parents.
Yeah.
That's 90% of family therapy treatment, is about,
It's about parent
it's
coaching.
about parent coaching, and it's about, the identified patient in the family is usually the kids, and usually what's their symptomology is directly related to or reflection of the symptomology in the unit. And
Right.
parents can't stand hearing that because they want the
They want a
therapist to
quick
fix the
fix, and
kid.
they want somebody else to take care of it.
Exactly. But at the end of the day, child therapy, adolescent therapy, it doesn't work unless it's implemented in the home as well, unless changes are made at home. When changes are not made at home, it fails 100 times out of 100. That's it. Maybe that child will take what you say or your sessions and know that there are adults out there who care, or there's an adult out there who, they have a positive memory with, and that's
Yeah.
wonderful. But the actual interventions themselves that you want, the child to have boundaries at home and all of that,
Yeah.
100 times out of 100, they fail if the parents aren't involved.
Right. And like you said about diagnosing gender dysphoria, or what we're talking about with diagnosing other mental health issues, because they're working so hard on forming their identity, you run the risk of concretizing that thing by offering that to them at
Yes.
that
And
point in their life.
it's yes. And, I have, people in my personal life, I know that were just about failing pretty much out of high school and end up discovering a true love for, science. Okay. Something that requires a lot of math and a lot of complicated theories. And their high school scores would not reflect that they are even capable of doing that, let alone
Right.
to be interested
Because so
in
much
turning
growth
it into a
happens.
career. So much growth happens. And then they realize, oh, wait a minute. And I'm thinking of one in particular, I'm just going to take one class at a time now that I'm in college, or two classes at a time. I'm just going to take my time. And oh my gosh, all of a sudden we discover this brilliant talent emerging. You don't give them a chance to do that if you are throwing them into therapy because they're not where you think they need to be. There's a difference between a child that's displaying symptomology that is, likened to schizophrenia, okay, for example.
Mhm.
Okay, where they, have command hallucinations, and those command hallucinations are telling them they're harming themselves or somebody else. But again, the percentage of that is so small when it comes to, kids and mental health. Thankfully, it does exist. It's just not huge on the spectrum. And that is something to be looked at in a serious way. That's something to be, taken to a psychiatrist for, but it's not the majority of the kids. That's the thing. Now with the gender dysphoria and with the kids, different gendered, but we used to tell them in grief, and I'll say it in this way too, in this form too. What is always helpful the most is parents sitting down and talking to their kids directly about this stuff. That's what's always has been the most direct help, is the adults sitting down and having those conversations, not us as the therapists. But with the gender dysphoria and then the activism involved, therapy is going to make your child worse. And I will say that again, therapy in this current climate, without very clear ideas and boundaries and understanding, is going to make your child worse in this climate. It just will.
Absolutely.
You need to be discerning, because if you're in the hands of the wrong therapist, it is the difference between your kid having a chance to explore a little bit about their feelings, learn how to tolerate uncomfortableness, and just know that that's part of life, and that you can't kind of always have what you want. And a kid who's then so fragile and so weak that they're suicidal multiple times, throughout the course of their lives, and get roped into a gender cult, which tells you that the whole entire reason, problem, and stress that you're feeling is because you're being oppressed, in the wrong body in a way. So that's what a therapist can do. That's the kind of power they hold.
I've talked with 2 parents just in the last month who reached out to me because their child was convinced through therapy that they were transgender through relationships with therapists.
There you go.
Which is,
through
that's
therapy.
Through therapy.
It doesn't get worse than this.
No, it's really
awful.
Yeah.
That's the power that it holds. And that's funny because, I was at a family's event, a couple of days, maybe a week ago, and everyone's sitting at the table talking about this new woke thing that's coming around, and there's this weird gender thing. And I grabbed the arms of the chair I was in.
You're like, come sit by me.
And I said, I told you so.
Oh my gosh.
And then I shouted, and I just had my hands were making this banner gesture. I told you so. It was gonna come to you. You thought you were going to be in this little community that's so insulated from the rest of the world, and it's fairly conservative, family values. And they didn't believe me. And then my person, my loved one, looked at me and said, she's been talking about this for a very long time, and we've all blown her off. And I said, thank you. Hallelujah. I didn't want to be right. I wanted to be heard, because
but the writing was on the wall and you saw it.
Yes. Yeah. So then this person says, yes, she's been saying this for, the past couple of years, and we've just kind of rolled her eyes like, oh, there she goes off again on one of her rants, right? Well,
you were in the indoctrination center, so
I told them I was in it, and I said, listen, you're not going to get out of this alive here. You're gonna face it.
Yeah.
You need to be prepared in advance. And how do you want to deal with it? And there were so many concerns about who got accepted to where based on what, and just hearing about other schools and how the admissions process was going for college students that were transferring from even community colleges, and what they're looking at on the application. You see kids of color or backgrounds that are not white getting in with way lower grades, way lower scores, no letters of recommendation, for example, over kids that are white and that have better grades and letters of recommendation. So what's the answer there? Well, it's kind of what I was preaching about in that regard too, which is, there's a bigger apparatus at work here. It's an apparatus, it's a machine.
And I think that there's a bigger it's interesting to look at what's driving this. And I think that I think there's a crisis in parenting. for one
Yes.
thing. And I haven't really, I'd love to give this some real thought and draw it, pick it apart and think about all the components. But it seems to me that, well, there's the whole concept of attachment parenting, which I don't have a problem with. I like it. And in fact, I used a lot of those principles in raising my kids, even before I knew what that phrase was. And that's just being responsive to your child, doing things like, extended breastfeeding, co-sleeping with your baby and not putting them in a crib in their own room, et cetera. And just sort of being child-led with certain things and not so rigidly expecting to place a structure on the child. But I think you can take that too far and you can become a really permissive parent, and you can fail to put boundaries and discipline into the child's life to help them to develop those things for themselves. And you can end up with all kinds of power dynamics that are difficult within a family relationship. But another factor that strikes me is the increase in expertism, I guess, is how I keep thinking about it. With regard to child rearing. Like the amount of well baby visits that a new parent does, it's pretty nuts. If there's something, if your child is ill, I could see bringing them to the doctor, but you're supposed to bring your kid in at like, a couple days old, and then at 10 days old, and then at 2 weeks old, and then at 2 months old, and then at 4 months old, and then at 6. And you're supposed to just constantly be going to the doctor for advice on every aspect of raising your child. So you're not going, if you're following this modern parenting paradigm, you're getting all of your information on how you're supposed to raise your kid from an expert that you've hired, who is then becomes your authority outside of grandma or your aunt, or maybe your sister who has kids that are older than yours or whatever. And certainly outside of trusting your own intuition, because everything is your, and one of the reasons that they do this is because they want to train you to continue to see the doctor for your child's.
That's exactly right.
Life.
They want to train you to do that. As you're talking, I'm thinking very clearly about what my mother said when my sister was first having, kids and whatnot. And, my mother had said, you know what, the way that you, raise a child or improve a child's immune system is to take them out and let them get sick, take them out in the world. Why
expose
are you
them
sheltering, expose them to things? Why are you sheltering this little newborn baby? Let them go with you to the restaurant, let them go with you to wherever. That whole concept that, these parents are so afraid of germs coming in the house. And my mother was like, the more that, you can build their immune system up as best as you possibly can, she was all about that. And it was, something that just very naturally was instinctual to her. She just kind of felt. And so I don't know. I mean, I didn't really ever get sick as a kid. I almost was never sick. I was never, but I also wasn't smart. Overly.
Well, it changed so much. So I have 2 sets of kids. I have 2 daughters, and then I have 13 years between my 2 daughters and my 2 sons. And I noticed how much more reliant parents are expected to be on experts now, even than they were when my daughters were small. So there's been a massive shift. I mean,
in just a decade.
In
decade and a half.
Exactly. And it's things like, so I worked in a naturopathic clinic, and I shared an office with a young pediatric naturopath, and she was wonderful. I really liked this person quite a lot, but she was new, and she was very authoritarian with her patients. And there was this mother who had a newborn, and the doctor wasn't happy with how well the baby was gaining weight. Mom didn't take the doctor's advice. Doctor called CPS right away to get somebody else involved because the mother wasn't taking her advice. I was appalled by this, but the attitude was, listen to me or else I will make you listen to me. And this wasn't a neglectful mother. I mean, she was an older mother and a very wanted and very cared for child. It just, she didn't agree with, I guess, supplementing formula or whatever it was that the doctor was trying to get her to do. And so you see this overreach of the
Yes.
experts also you will do what I say.
Yes.
And so in a sense, when something starts to go wrong with your child, with your teen, and they're exhibiting behaviors that you don't know how to handle, it's it's almost become trained into parents to think that they need to outsource this
Yes.
to an expert. Like, I am
Yes.
not qualified to help my kid with this problem, so let me find someone who is.
Yes, that is right. There's an over reliance. And we talked about this very briefly when we discussed kind of this phenomenon of what happens in the Midwest, or places where they are small towns and there's only a couple of people in that small town that, are the quote unquote experts, and why that then becomes so much worse than even, or can be, than these bigger cities where you have, because at least you still have multiple different, kinds of options. But when you put all of your cards into the two or three, experts or whomever that live in your area or that you trust, and their word is the final word, then that's where you've lost control completely of raising your child. You've lost control of your own physical health as well.
Yeah.
And so when this, that colleague of mine was talking about why the Midwest is it's easy to capture the Midwest in that regard, it's because of the leaning on this expertism phenomenon that's going on that you're talking about, that we're talking about here. And it's leaning on those experts for answers to questions that are just even more involved than even just health, right? So now they're turning to the therapist and the psychologist,
right, which is
and
using the same playbook. It really is
same
just this
thing.
and
Medicalizing.
no, it is totally medicalizing. I think that that's one of the main criticisms I have of where the counseling and therapy field is heading, is it's becoming very rigidly medicalized. And I think that if there's one, well, there are many, I think there's not really an area of being a human that lends itself very well to that kind of systematization. But if any absolutely doesn't, it's the emotional and spiritual life of a person,
Yes.
which we're
That's
now
always
doing.
been missing, I think, too, in general. And I think I've, maybe mentioned it here, but the one thing that I noticed as I went through kind of just my program as a student, and then now, the extensive lack of belief in any higher power is very prominent. And I'm not trying to hoist or thrust religion upon anybody, because I'm not religious myself. But if I didn't have a sense of a greater, why does the 12-step model work so well? It's the higher power. That's why. That is the core of it, is based upon something greater than yourself. Even if you don't believe in a higher power, being of service and turning your, rather than thinking about your problems all day and going out and being of service to somebody else, that's the greater power.
That is your higher power then.
That's the higher power right there, right? So I'm talking about not necessarily God. For me, it is, but it doesn't have to be for everybody. But a higher power that, an energy even that's positive in nature, that somehow kind of gives you those intuitive thoughts or ideas or moments, the wisdom, the I felt that gut instinct. Like, where does that come from? This in sort of greater,
sort of like a feeling of a sense of the universal.
Exactly. And that's been missing so much. And I think that it contributes to a lot of this lack of purpose and sense of, purpose that people just don't really have. They're not.
Well, and it's provided in the
grounding.
social justice ideology in a different way, in a perverse way.
Yes, very much. So that even to say God now is very anti-critical social justice, and it's extremely
it's like disqualifying.
It's disqualifying, and it's almost like an insult or something, a degrading or something. I mean, people be insulted if you actually talk about any of that stuff in a therapy classroom these days. And that to me is very difficult. Well, I don't do 12 steps, don't believe in a higher power. Forget God then. What is bigger or greater than you, that you have, some sort of agency to participate in paying it forward? What is that? That's the guiding principle and why the 12-step model works the way that it does. I don't care what addiction, there's a bunch of addiction models out there at the end of the day. And please, somebody send me, information if you've done research that can disprove that the most effective model of sobriety still to this day is 12-step. I want to see somebody show me that that's not true.
And do you think that you attribute that more to the aspect of it that calls to the higher power than to the community peer support,
I think
mutual reinforcement aspect?
it's both, but
Okay.
you're going to,
Mhm.
I think that's a close second. And the reason I
Okay.
say a close second is because at the end of the day, there's going to be a moment where it's 3 a.m. in the morning. You are
Mhm.
tossing and turning. You are stressed out. You are afraid. You are alone. You are, you can't get anybody on the phone. You can't get your peer support. You
Mhm.
can read the affirmations or things that you
Mhm.
say all day
Mhm.
long.
Mhm.
But in that moment where it's just you, yourself, and you,
Mhm.
what do you reach for?
There has to
What
be a
you
meaning
hold?
for why you're doing this. Why am I
Correct.
doing this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you don't have that as an anchor, then I
Yeah.
don't think that you can fully make use of your peer group to the
Mhm.
extent that you would be able to, because you got to figure it out when you're by yourself. Sometimes you can have 1,500 different tools that are, at your disposal. Go to yoga, okay, but at 3 a.m. you may not be able to go to a yoga class. So what are you going to do in that moment? You can go do
Right.
yoga on the ground. That's still you reaching for something bigger than yourself. It's you trying to harness energy or interactions or something that are greater than you. So I still think that this greater than you still kind of takes the cake and is the anchor
Mhm.
that these other blocks are built upon. Even
Mhm.
peer support is greater than you. It's the sum is greater than its parts or whatever,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's where I think the 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 model is so successful, is because it
Mhm.
rests on that. And that, I think, takes a lot of attention off of the whole me, and this sort of narcissism that is critical
Mhm.
social
Mhm.
justice, this sort of narcissistic,
Mhm.
snowflakey, sort of fragility,
Mhm. Mhm.
for lack of better words. I heard one today that was the terminal uniqueness. Well, no one
De
understands
Determinal
me.
uniqueness?
Terminal
Oh,
uniqueness.
terminal unique. Okay.
Terminal, yes.
Okay.
No one
Yeah.
understands me. No one
Well,
gets
that's
it.
kind
No
of
one
like
gets me.
that seems like the cousin of nihilism, really.
It for sure. Yes, it's a
Mm.
nihilism. I love it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Because it is so fatalistic in its own way. And so
Yeah.
you
It's
prevent right
black pill.
connection, but you
Yeah.
do. Right. And Gabor Mate, who's an addiction, specialist, okay, and he's kind of the new, model through which we teach addiction, but he says the opposite of addiction is connection. And I think that's
Mhm.
actually, I would say that for depression too. I think that's
Mhm.
pretty
Mhm.
prominent for a few things.
Mhm.
But where does that connection happen? What happens with the connection? Again, it's like the sum being greater than its parts. And so
Mhm.
that's where I think we kind of stop thinking about what is bigger than me,
Yeah.
um, uh, in this moment right now. And maybe right now that will take off that sinking self, kind of,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a
deprecation.
really good point. I mean, you're talking about the the removal of spirituality
Yeah.
from this whole, has it ever even been much of a part of mental health? I mean, it's kind of at odds with, it's
Yes.
not something that can easily be like chained and chunked and done in a technical medical way, this
No.
implementation. So,
Yes.
and so the model that we have now is going very technocratic, very, I felt like being trained to be a counselor felt like I was being trained to be a technician that could punch in codes instead of
Yes.
feeling like I was being trained to work with
You
the
know what though?
intricacies of people.
Yes. So here's the thing. And again, great ideas that have been turned sour, right? And I said
Yeah.
this before, some of these were great ideas turned sour. The APA president, okay, did a 17-minute TED Talk video. And I just saw this last week and I was mortified.
Mm.
And she's a Black woman. And, she came out and talked about exactly what you just said, plugging in people and plugging in diagnosing and plugging in treatment and all
And
this.
she didn't like this, or she did.
And she
Okay.
said, this is why we have to decolonize psychology, so that we don't just plug things in and we don't just, so I was, kind of taken aback, because the kind of interventions that are out there that are sort of known to be effective, like why we all got into this, that have nothing to do with your immutable characteristics and everything to do with how you personally sort of as a person move through the world and your own identity formation, outside of what society tells you, outside of what your family tells you. It's what do you say about your own self? What's your what value do you hold for yourself? So these are some things that are extremely important, tools of intervention and qualities of treatment models that are important, that work as well. But the dismissiveness of all of it, because to her, the case example she used was a Black family who was the parents were successful, whatever. And she gave an example of how therapists might work with them and from a classical point of view. And then she gave a woke therapist, and the woke therapist said, I think part of the problem here is that you're not acknowledging like the influence of racism and discrimination and all of these, isms that are happening all around you. So let's get up and start redefining our own value and culture. And they start incorporating African dance into their therapy sessions, and oh my gosh, they get better. So this simplifying, right, that nothing else, right, that it all goes back to your roots of your ancestry is the answer to all of this. That therapy, the classical models dismiss that. So I find it just absolutely kind of mortifying, but at the same time puzzling to me, that you can have these, and this is what I've said about critical social justice, it's too boundaried and it's rigid in its thinking, and it's too porous in its thinking, because it allows, right, for too many different, there's no guardrail with any of it.
Right.
It's out of control. So without any containment, the ideas themselves and the people within these systems themselves are not contained. I mean, it can bring out the darkest of all of us. If we all have a dark shadow, it's sort of a Jungian idea.
Yeah.
Then that can bring that out, out of anybody, the person that's the most spiritual, and maybe that's connected to the kind of the drive to survive, which would be a Freudian concept, right? That's kind of our main driving force is survival. So at the end of the day, these kinds of things are taken out of context and placed into a different scenario and stripped away of their value. So now she's devalued all of the history of everything that we've ever done in psychology for the sake of the fact that we didn't incorporate cultural components into a family treatment model. That may have worked for one family. It's not going to work for all of them.
Well, and what it sounds like she really did,
individualizing again, right?
It really sounds like she provided them with a value structure that they were able to identify with, and it was almost a placebo effect kind of thing, because it was coming in. Right. It's coming in so strong from somebody who sounds really sure, and so you think, well, yes, that's the answer to it, and then through exploration and play and
but it's a
opening
family,
themselves.
Though. It was a made up family.
Oh, it was just made up.
I should make clear.
Oh, it was a made up anecdote.
Anecdote. Let me just make sure I'm clear about that.
Yeah,
she made it up.
They do that so often just to suit their argument.
Yes, and so I sat there and went, "This isn't even real." And so you're talking about an example of what you could introduce, but it's what you just said.
Yeah, but then that's all from the therapist's mind. That's not coming from the family as like she's not listening to their. Yeah, she's placing that on them. And,
correct. So they want to say that in their corner, that's what everybody's doing, is just, plugging numbers in. At the same time, on the other side of the coin, my issue is that they're just plugging numbers in.
They're just plugging their own formula in.
I have that.
Let me insert white supremacy here. Let me insert critical race theory here. Yeah.
Exactly. Bingo.
Yeah.
That's
or
exactly what it is.
You're a teenager.
Same thing.
It must be that you're trans.
Correct.
Yeah.
They're doing the same thing they loathe because it fits their story.
Absolutely.
It's their formula to plug in.
Yeah.
while they want to preach about uniqueness all day long till they're blue in the face. They're doing the same thing. That was my big issue with what she was saying and what she was doing. Because at first, in the first few minutes, she got individualized treatment plans. Then we
that
heard
sounds
what
good.
her individualized treatment plans look like, and how colonization of psychology doesn't allow for you to explore your cultural ancestry and your connection to it. I mean, that is the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard. And it come out of the president of the APA. Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
That should scare everybody. If people
That,
are not afraid that are in this profession, you need to be afraid right now. I mean, it's a bad thing to be doing. Okay.
And that brings me back to this question I ask for myself and I ask for other people, which is what are the alternatives for people who want to work in that capacity with other people? And I mean, I've got that's where I've landed. But I'm very aware, and I don't like that I didn't finish my master's degree. I don't like that. I don't, it's hard to wrestle with that, that I know I have a little bit more work to do to finish that. I don't think I ever will be able to. I'm still talking to Antioch through a lawyer, but I don't think that's going to happen. And then do I sink all that time into a new school just to go all the way back through it? And where does that leave me? And also, I have the benefit of going through most of a training program, but somebody else who feels like I do, or feels like you did before you started your education and wants to go into this kind of work, they need some sort of training. They need some sort of mentorship and program. And when going through one of these captured programs is basically like putting yourself through woke indoctrination, psychological torture, and an awful lot of cognitive dissonance just to eke out the bits that are valuable for yourself, then that's not a very appealing path for a lot of reasons. So what do you do? Because it's not really sufficient just to go hang up a shingle and act like you know everything, because you don't.
No,
you still need some training.
It's a good question. And I think, being a member of Critical Therapy Antidote, kind of being there's sort of four of us that are kind of becoming there's the founder, one of them, couple, and then I kind of just came on, leached on someone else's, coattails, I guess. I somehow got.
You're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you. Thank you for that. But there's just really some incredible people I've been around. And anyway, and these are conversations we have sometimes in these meetings that we do. And I don't really know how to answer the question. I think there's an existential crisis that therapists are facing right now. And it's
absolutely
really about, can I, within this context, still provide the kind of therapy authentically that I want to do? Telling the truth. Somebody mentioned something about truth telling, and it's like, yes, okay, truth telling is important, but if your board doesn't back up the scientific truth that you're trying to share, then you are more vulnerable to losing your license and ability to practice. So we've left the whole landscape of rational, sane thinking. We jumped into this big ocean of irrationality with just wave after wave coming after us. And it's like, well, how long till you drown? Is there a way to keep yourself afloat? What do you have to give up and give into in order to do that? Because some therapists,
it's sacrificing a lot,
much, and some will. It's sacrificing a lot. Some aren't going to face, those challenges, and some are going to face a lot of them.
Well, I've wondered if there's room for an offshoot that is
probably
based on not mental health, but existentialism and philosophy.
Yeah.
So, sort of a different thing. Question. I mean, that's kind of what I model what I'm doing after. It's not at all based on any kind of diagnostic mental health model. It's more about existentialism and where do you find the meaning in your life, and how do you work to find that again, and et cetera. But it's more philosophical than anything that resembles clinical. It's not clinical in the slightest.
And that might be the parallel profession, is that it is something that's more based on that. I mean, it's hard to say, we're never going to go back to what we were before the capture. so we have to become something else.
Mhm.
We're still going to continue to move forward because time moves forward. So we have
Yeah.
to become something else. And I don't know what that something else is, but I love what you're doing. I love that idea, because it's kind of in line with the therapist's own personal questions and struggles right now, their
Mhm.
own kind of existential philosophical, purpose of why I'm here, why am I doing what I do. That is something that every one of them, have to face now in the
Mhm.
mirror, seeing
Mhm.
how captured our regulatory bodies are and
Mhm.
institutions, which means you're no longer free to practice under ethical codes, that
Mhm.
are reasonable and sane. Now we have some additional, sort of spotlight on what we're doing in there
Mhm.
that's problematic. So what do you do? And it's too big a question, I think, to be able to answer. I like that idea of the parallel path of an existential philosophical type of, because at the end of the day, I mean, that's probably what therapy is anyway, right?
Mhm.
Searching for meaning and purpose. I mean, I'm sure
Mhm.
in a
Mhm.
lot of, you can fit all of those models into those two things, meaning and purpose. And in
Mhm. Mhm.
purpose and meaning, that's where you can learn to take
Yeah,
action.
because you have to have something that motivates you through life, or else you fall into the abyss.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. So I think it's, and meaning, you can always, you can, whether the meaning is because this is something that happened in your childhood and you're continuously replaying it because you've never fully processed it, that's meaning right
Mhm.
there. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a lot of ways to incorporate that, in a lot of ways in which meaning and purpose encapsulate almost every single model under this umbrella. So I think that
Mhm.
that's a very brilliant idea, as a matter of fact, to have something that is a parallel program that focuses on that, because all
Mhm.
these models end up at the end of the day, the core, why am I here? What am I
Mhm.
doing here? Why
Mhm.
does this matter to me? Why am I even here receiving treatment? Why am I talking to this person? I mean, it
Mhm.
can just, the very core of that, of those questions, all the way up to, the existential crisis that I'm talking about, which is much bigger. Do I want to
Yeah.
be part of a machine, an apparatus?
Right.
Can I afford to start over? There's the very real cost of living. Can I afford to start over
Absolutely.
questions that come
Yeah.
up,
Yeah.
that do come up.
Yeah.
It's, can you do that? Is it realistic for you to do that? Can you afford to, take care of your family that way? So I mean,
And
those
my
are
sense
other.
is that until people
Yeah.
are ready to give up their insurance networks,
Yes.
they are not really going to be free to practice the
Yes.
way that, because that's a
Yes.
huge that's a bind that you're in.
Absolutely. That's a huge bind you're
But
in.
it's something that people have come to rely on.
Yes.
So it's a difficult one to sort out.
Yes. It's the very, first group that wanted, mental health services because they're just as important as physical health services. Okay. Okay. That's a good idea in theory. Here's where
Yeah.
we ended up with that good idea.
Right.
That's again, the
Right.
problem is, like, these good ideas end up becoming, tainted. They just become poisonous because it's this too much of a good thing concept. It's too extreme. And then when you go into this place of that, you've lost the nuanced richness of that good idea. It's
Yeah.
gone now.
Well, yeah, it's just that attempting to collectivize,
Yes.
and it loses sight of humanity when you try
Yes.
to apply something,
Yes.
in that broad collective sense.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it seems like it's one of those areas where you can't ever, it's always going to shift. You can't
Yes.
really have a firm policy on something like that, because as soon as you
Yes.
make something firm, you've actually done the very thing that is the
Yes.
death of the individual. I don't know.
Yes.
It's a paradox.
It's such a paradox because that's exactly what happens. Now
Mhm.
you've made it accessible to everybody
Mhm.
because you've done that, but because now it's accessible to everybody, now they're the ones in control of
Yeah.
how you're going to be able to do it. Now they've taken the steering wheel, or they're taking the lead now. That's the
Mhm.
problem, is you're under their thumb.
Mhm.
So insurance makes you write treatment plans that come up with arbitrary goals that are not really measurable, but you have to find a way to say that they
To try to
are.
make them look measurable, smart goals.
You need to have smart
Yeah.
goals to make them look
It's very
measurable and
corporate.
achievable,
Yeah.
very corporate, but you also have to prove that the person still needs you in order for
Right.
them to still get approved coming, that they're not well enough yet.
Yeah.
You've determined by your analysis from the 1 hour a week you spend with them that they're not well enough yet.
Mhm.
So the whole thing is sort of where, the sweet spot between, and it's like that in addiction. When you go to these residential treatment facilities, people used to ask me a lot of the time, like, well, what's the point of treating addiction if like the rate of success is so small? It's not that the rate of success is so small. It's that if you cannot afford to pay for the long-term treatment that you need a good 1 year in inpatient, probably, and another 1 year in a really good sober, kind of clean living home.
I guess depending on how significant the
And
addiction issue is.
yes, it's 30 days in a rehab. It doesn't matter if your addiction isn't that significant
Oh,
or
okay.
has damaged you. It's
You
not
don't feel like
enough.
that's good enough. Okay.
No, because when you get to the point that you need inpatient treatment,
Okay.
residential,
I
you're at a
see.
point where you have not been able to stop on your own.
Yeah,
And
okay.
it's your whole brain chemistry, sort of everything about that part of you has sort of changed, and it has
Mhm.
to be kind of for lack of a better
Recalibrated.
word,
Yeah.
recalibrated,
Yeah.
rewired, right?
Yeah.
So that you need to, in order for that to happen, you need to have a certain amount of pressure and life circumstances fall on you to practice these new coping skills that don't involve substances. In order for a lot of those things to happen, a good amount of time has to have passed where you are in a place that's very secure and very safe.
Mhm.
So it's not that the models don't work. They actually
Mhm.
work exceptionally well and are tried and true. It's the fact that people, when they're using insurance isn't going to pay for that length of time. They're not going to pay for you to be in treatment that long.
Mhm.
And so then if you don't have anywhere from $20,000 to $90,000 a month cash
Jeez.
in
Wow.
your pocket to pay out of pocket,
That's a
and your
ton.
insurance denies your claims, what happens? Well, they go to a lower level of care, and
Mhm.
it's not going to be as successful. And then here's where you see sort of the relapse
Wow, that's
over and
such a
over
crazy
again.
amount of money.
Yeah, that's about the cost.
Sounds
So
very inflated.
it is. So they've turned that into a business too. And that's
Yeah.
another podcast for another day. But
Yeah.
the point is that, when you start to, okay, great, insurance. Well, now here's the game playing that happens with insurance.
Right. I know. I do feel like we could spend a whole, if you want to. I mean, I've dealt with
Yeah.
insurance quite a lot. I worked in the medical field
Oh
for
yeah.
11
That'd be
years
great then.
doing insurance work.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Because
Um,
that'd be great. Because that's when
yeah.
I was working in patient
Oh,
too. The
yeah, let's talk
utilization
about
reviews I
that.
had to do all the time. Those were very rough because we had to
Yeah.
make them look sick enough,
Oh,
but
yeah,
not too
it's
sick.
ridiculous. Yeah. It really influences the care that's given
Yes.
unduly.
Yes.
And in the chat, I see David Carpenter. Thank you so much for the super chat. That's so nice. And then he says, I'm strongly considering canceling my own health insurance because of these things. Professionals who are ready to walk away from the insurance companies may find a base of clients who have also walked. And
Yes.
I think that's right. I mean, I carry insurance in case of something
Yes.
catastrophic, but I pay for consultations out of pocket because I
Yes.
don't like the insurance getting all of my information. I would rather not
Yes.
use it. So
Yes.
if I need to see a doctor, and I don't see doctors very often, but if I do, I pay out of pocket.
Yes. That's very smart.
So yeah.
It's
But
very smart.
Christine, I guess we should give everybody a break from our conversation because we've been talking for a while. We should pick this
Ooh,
up with another
yes.
one
Sounds good.
in the next week or so, 2
Sounds
weeks.
good.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All
Thank you
right.
so much
Excellent. Thank
for
you.
coming to talk to me.
Always such a pleasure. Thank you so much. I
Definitely.
love it. Yes.
And thanks to everybody
Yes.
who is in the chat. We appreciate
Yes.
you very much.
Yes.